Welcome to Voices from Eyrie. My name is Goliath, and you're listening to this podcast? Will the wonders of this world never cease?
The story is told, though who can say if it be true, of a clan of medieval warriors awoken in modern-day Manhattan, of the animated series that told their story.
It is an age of darkness. Superstition and the sword rule. It is an age of fear. It is the age of gargoyles.
Welcome to Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast.
Hello and welcome to Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast. I'm Zach Joyner, the owner of the website that powers the program, spidey-dude.com. And I am the executive producer of the network that powers the program, the Spidey Dude Radio Network. Before we get started, though, I wanted to thank our patrons at patreon.com/SpideyDude Network, Greg, Jurgen, Vinkman, Scott, Kaylee, and Phoenician. Thank you for your support. And if you want to get this show earlier, check it out there, as well as other fine perks that you'll get whenever you become a Patreon subscriber. There will be some exclusive content that's only for Patreon subscribers coming to you very soon. But before I turn it over to our hosts, I want to encourage you to check out our other fine programs, such as Spidey Dude Experience, ASM Classics, Make Mine Mayday, Bogan Rider Variety Hour, the Salby Sima Era Podcast, Clone Saga Chronicles, and a Spectacular Radio, a Spectacular Spider-Man related show that start a few familiar names to the program. Please follow the network on Twitter at Spidey Dude Radio and this show at From Eyrie, and feel free to send them feedback at gargoylesvoices@gmail.com. Leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast catcher, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, iHeartRadio Podcasts, Amazon Audible, as well as Google Podcasts. It helps us raise our visibility, and like, share, and subscribe for more at Spidey Dude Network, youtube.com/Spidey Dude Network. Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, as I mentioned the Twitter threads, but also follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Spidey Dude Network, as well as Instagram, if you like Instagram, instagram.com/Spidey Dude Network. With that out of the way, it's absolutely my pleasure to introduce the hosts of our show, Jennifer L. Anderson and Greg Weisman.
Welcome back, Gargoyles fans, to another episode of Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast. I am your co-host, Greg Weisman, and joining me as usual is my partner in crime, Jennifer L. Anderson.
Hello, everyone.
And back again is the co-creator and co-producer of the first 2 seasons of Gargoyles and the writer of the SLG comic books, Gargoyles and Gargoyles Bad Guys, Mr. Greg Weisman.
Glad to be here.
And we are pleased and honored to be joined by a living legend, a man who needs no introduction, but we're going to give him one anyway. Actor, voiceover artist, stage, screen, Mr. Keith David.
Howdy, howdy.
Keith, thank you so much for joining us. It means a lot, and I would like to begin this by congratulating you on Douglas the Prophet. I'm a New Yorker.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker. The tickets were sold out. Just when I found out about it, I would have loved to have attended.
Well, I would have liked you to have been there, but, we had a great time. Thank you.
But a little bit of trivia. The first time we met, it actually wasn't at a Gargoyles convention, though I saw you at most of those. I met you for the first time. It was summer of 2000. You were doing Shakespeare in the Park, A Winter's Tale, and I introduced myself.
Wow.
I introduced myself to you shortly afterwards. You were very gracious, and I wouldn't have known had Greg not posted at the time in the Station 8 comment room telling fans in the New York area to go see it.
Well, thank you, Greg.
I like to help.
He's your hype man.
Yeah, man. Love that.
Anything I can do.
So, Keith, we like to get to know our guests. Tell us a little bit about your background. What made you go into acting?
For me, it was a calling. I just always wanted to be an actor. And, I wanted to be a preacher, and I wanted to be a lawyer. When I watched Topper on TV, I wanted to be a bank president. When I watched the Donna Reed show, I wanted to be a pediatrician. But I could be an actor and do all those things. So,
very nice. And how did you go from acting on the screen to voice acting? What was your first voice acting experience? Like?
My first, I auditioned a lot for commercials. And in those days, it was a very closed club. But I had a wonderful agent who just kept sending me out. And after a while, I started getting requests. And, I had always wanted to do animation and narration. And soon I got to do that. I mean, that was great. I used to do a lot of National Geographic, which was always fun because, I used to watch Marlon Perkins, Wild
Kingdom. Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, I used to watch that all the time. It was one of my.
It was really great, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Like he would be sitting back in his office telling us all about it and sending what's the other guy's name, sending him out there to go trank dart this rhinoceros. Marlon Perkins had the cushy job. It was a great show.
And the great and great guys narrating it, John Forsythe, who was a guest on Gargoyles, got to meet him. William Conrad, all those, really phenomenal voices.
Iconic voices.
Very.
And as it turned out, Ed Asner was, one of his best friends was one of my teachers, Norman Rose. And I think one of the nicest and heartwarming things ever said to me was one day we were doing an episode and he leaned over to me and he said, Norman would be very proud of you. And I was like, wow, now that's a compliment.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Ooh, good. Yeah. Kind of chills.
Let's talk a little bit about developing Goliath as a character. We discussed that a little bit in the making of the show. This is for both Greg and Keith, of course. And obviously, Keith ended up bringing a lot to the role. He is Goliath, as far as I'm concerned.
I think as far as we're all concerned.
It was one of the the best auditions I've ever had, and certainly one of the greatest jobs I've ever had. Goliath is certainly in the top 3 of my very favorite characters in the world. I mean, when I grow up, I want to be like Goliath. And the thing that I remember the most was, as they will have a frame of reference, it said Sean Connery type. So I came in trying to do my best Sean Connery, whatever that was. And then I think I don't know if it was Greg or whoever said, don't do that. Just talk. And maybe it was Jamie. I don't know. But
I think it was Jamie.
Yeah. Then the next thing I know, we're all there working together. And it was really one. I mean, my God, the best 3 seasons, of my life and professionally. I mean, I just loved it. Especially with the ones that Greg wrote. Well, I don't say that because he's here.
So sweet to say.
He's got a wonderful, wonderful propensity for the Shakespeare.
None of them.
Huh?
He didn't write any of those.
None of them. I was the producer, supervising producer with Frank Parr, but in those days, I didn't have time to write, so I wrote literally none of them. I did edit them all, but But no, I didn't. I don't want to take credit where it's not due.
Well, we had some wonderful writers, and
we did, yeah.
Michael Reeves, Chandler, who wrote this episode.
Michael was wonderful.
Now, Greg, when you were going for casting, like, obviously the cornerstone of this whole show is Goliath. Like, what kind of stuff obviously you're asking for a Sean Connery type was what they were leading with, but what were you expecting?
I don't specifically remember asking for Connery. That may have been some kind of lost in the translation message that got out to Keith at some point.
It was like no, they always have a frame of reference. Like when you're going to do a commercial, they look for, a James Earl Jones type, or they want a Burgess Meredith type. That's the art. And on my paper, on my sides was Sean Connery.
One of the deals when we were auditioning for this show was two things. One was obviously Goliath was the key character for us, and yet the two characters we had the hardest time finding were Goliath and Elisa. We cast Damona right away, Xanatos right away, Brooklyn, Lexington, Broadway, Bronx right away, Hudson right away, and we went through hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, of actors on both Goliath and Elisa, and heard a lot of really great people, and yet it just never quite seemed right. And then Keith walked in the door, and same with Sally on the Elisa side, but Keith walked in the door, and he read, and suddenly it's like he's the guy, like no question. And again, this wasn't like desperation or anything like that. I mean, at one point, again, without mentioning names, we were feeling desperate and on both those roles, and we went into my boss, Gary Kreisel, with people who we thought, wow, this isn't exactly what we're looking for, but I feel like maybe they could get there. With a Goliath choice and an Elisa choice. And Gary wisely said, is this really what you were looking for? And we're like, and Jamie and I are like, well, not exactly, but we think we can get there with them. And he's like, don't settle, not on these two characters. Don't settle. And so we didn't. And we didn't know it, but we were just waiting for Keith to walk in the door. And then that was it. And Keith came in. I wasn't there, Keith, for your original audition, but when you came in for the first episode, it was like, yeah, that's it. This is, I had heard your audition already, obviously. I wasn't present when you recorded. But when you came in and I was there for the recording of the first episode, and I was like, yeah, this is so perfect. And that episode was so much fun to record. And the thing you have to remember is in the pilot, it was originally a 4-episode pilot that we later split into 5 episodes. The first episode encompassed the entire 994, medieval stuff that was later split between episodes 1 and 2. And so, at the end of that episode, you get, everything from, I've been denied everything, even my revenge.
My revenge.
You get that.
One of my great lines.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, to the lovely Angel of the Night quiet stuff early on, you get all these different aspects of Goliath in this first episode. And Keith just brought so much nuance to all of it, so much emotion and so much everything. And I am, as Keith noted, a massive Shakespeare junkie. And he really brought his Shakespearean chops to this show and just elevated everything. And that's what we needed because, we talked about this before when we talked about the development of the series. The series was originally developed as a comedy. And there was a version of almost every character in the comedy development except Goliath. There was a version of Hudson named Ralph. There was a version of Broadway named Coco. There was a version of Demona, of Xanatos, of Brooklyn Lexington, but there was no Goliath in the comedy development. And then when that failed to sell and we went back to the drawing board and it was suggested that we create, a heroic beast to go opposite the beauty, quote unquote, beauty that is Elisa, for that Beauty and the Beast feel, Greg Weisman and I created Goliath. And then we put the whole show through the prism of Goliath and came out the other end with the action drama, that still had humor in it, but it was no longer a comedy, right? And we put it through. And so everything revolved around Goliath. And I know I've talked about this before. One of the models I used was Hill Street Blues and how the show had this immense cast that rotated around Daniel J. Travanti's Frank Furillo character in the center. But if Furillo doesn't work, none of it works. And likewise, for Gargoyles, if Goliath doesn't work, none of it works. And Keith is the guy who walked in the door and made Goliath work. And our sessions, for the most part, particularly season 1, were just, I don't know how to say it except joyous. We had so much fun.
Yeah.
Recording this show. And then, Keith had to go and get a Broadway role in 7 guitars, and we had to record Keith season 2 long distance. And that wasn't, it was still great, but it wasn't as fun because, he wasn't there with the group, But that first season in particular, when we were all there together.
Oh, my God. Wasn't that great?
Such a blast.
Wasn't that great?
It really was.
And, the guy, Bob Pullman, whose studio that I used the most for Gargoyles, is today's one of my, very best friends. He's a really good man.
In New York?
In New York, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we just had a blast. And I remember when we premiered in Florida, Keith and Sally and Marina and Gary Kreisel and I went down to Orlando.
Right. Yeah.
For this premiere in this movie theater that used to, I don't think it's still there, but it was called Treasure Island or something like that.
Pleasure Island.
Or Pleasure Island. Yeah, Pleasure Island, off of out of Pinocchio, and they had a multiplex there. And I think I told this story, so I won't repeat the whole thing, but basically we had 2 screenings, and at the end of the screenings we had in one of the 2 theaters, we had a press conference, I guess you'd call it, with the 5 of us up on stage taking questions from the audience. And, someone was asked a question about the Beauty and the Beast, metaphor in this. And someone said something about, the beautiful woman and the ugly beast. And then some reporter in the audience said, with this huge romantic sigh in her voice, "Oh, I don't think Goliath's ugly at all." This is one of the reporters. She was like staring at Keith. Great amount of laughter goes up, but it was just like, how do you not fall in love with Goliath? I'm asking you, Jennifer, how do you not fall in love with Goliath?
I love Goliath. Just because I have a penchant for the bad guys.
In that case, we'll have Keith back on for one of the Thalog episodes.
Oh, absolutely.
And that was fun, too.
So, and that's what we needed. I mean, we needed our audience to love Goliath, to see him for who he was, and not judge the book by its cover, so to speak, and that is what Keith brought to it every single day. I was just in New York last weekend to see my kids, and I remember also that Keith and I went to, in like 1996, some event in New York to promote the show. Gary Mariano and I just remember because I walked by PJ Clark's, and I remember us after the event having dinner together at PJ Clark's, and Keith advising me to eat more healthfully. Advice that it only took me 30 years to take.
Well, that was
those were great.
That was my wife and I's first date.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, the very first Gargoyles convention. That's not what I was talking about before. That was a different event. That was some publicity event. But the next year was the first Gargoyles convention, which was in New York City that year. And I was at the convention, and I knew Keith was in New York, and I said, "Hey, do you want to come to this thing?" And he said, "Sure," but I didn't tell them at the convention because I wanted it to be a surprise.
Right.
And the three of us went to dinner, Keith and his future wife and I. But I had no idea that this was like their first date. That I had somehow, I don't quite know how I did this, but I had somehow become the third wheel on Keith's first date with this woman. I was like, and I found that out later, and I'm like, Keith, why did you let me come?
Well, let me tell you, we are celebrating. Tomorrow is our 21st wedding anniversary out of 25 years of being together.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And then from the dinner, I went back to the convention. We were having some panel. I don't specifically remember the topic, but we were doing some panel. And I knew Keith was coming, and I was confident of that. So halfway through the panel, I said, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, Keith David." And all eyes turn around, and I'm like, sorry, just kidding. And they all were, so mad at me. And then later, a little bit later, same panel, I see Keith standing in the back, and so once again, I go, "And ladies and gentlemen, here's Keith David," but they're all too smart for me. They're like, no, you're not going to fool me twice. And then Keith, in his great voice says, "Well, hello," and he comes walking down the aisle, and the place just explodes. I literally thought people were going to faint in the aisle. And it was, that was the first year of the convention. And again, I think maybe that's what impressed her so much that she later married him. I'm convinced that's why she married him.
All of his fans, his adoring fans.
Yeah.
It was something else. She still recalls that because I spilled something on my tie. And she said, "You were dressed so nicely and so sloppy."
That is awesome. And Keith, the fandom thanks you for your involvement with it. You've come to several of the conventions. You were always a pleasure. I wasn't at that first one, but I saw you at 2001 in LA, then in Montreal, then in Chicago, then back in LA again.
They were just always so much fun. I mean, I would still go to them today if they had them.
Wouldn't we all? I still tell people stories about you and I smoking Cubans in Montreal.
Yeah.
Nice. And I do believe we have an episode to discuss, the finale of the first season, Reawakening. And Greg, nice call back to the pilot with that title.
Yeah, I think that was Michael Reeves' idea. There was a point where I think the title of episode 13 was Awakening. And then we realized that we needed a title for the pilot, that we didn't want to just call it, Gargoyles. That is, the TV series was Gargoyles, but we didn't want to just call the pilot Gargoyles Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5, because it just felt weird that it didn't have its own identity, so to speak. And I'm pretty sure it was Michael who came up with the idea, well, let's take the Awakening title and put that on the pilot, and then we'll call episode 13 Reawakening. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's genius. I'm fairly certain that was Michael. I can't be 100% sure, but...
and my Lovecraftian loving brain immediately thought Reanimator when it first came up.
May have been what Michael had in mind, but I don't know.
Not so far from what we got to. So,
and we open with a flashback where we meet a character who will become known as, well, at least in the credits, as Othello, and voiced by Michael Dorn. And we learn a little bit more about gargoyle culture. They address each other as brother, but we find out later that it's not biological.
Right, they were Rookery brothers. Although I would say in those early days, it's not that we didn't know that. It's just that we weren't focusing on that for the audience. We wanted the audience to feel like the relationship was truly fraternal. So we weren't splitting the hairs of whether he was biologically a brother or the actual truth, which is that he was a Rookery brother. He's from the same
clan
generation of eggs, in essence, within the clan. And when we cast the role, Jamie asked, well, what should I be looking for the Othello/Coldstone role? And I said, well, this is Goliath's brother, so we need someone who has, the kind of chops that Keith has, so that he can hold the stage, so to speak, with Keith. Of course, and people ask all the time, how come there were so many Star Trek actors in Gargoyles? And the thing is that, we had Jonathan and Marina in the cast. So, Jamie and I would have these discussions at recordings. In other words, we'd be at a recording, and we'd be looking ahead to who we were going to bring in for the next two recordings kind of thing. And so, we're sitting there going, oh, well, we need someone who has those kind of deep vocal chops like Keith has. And I'm looking through the glass at Marina and Jonathan, and I'm like, well, what about Michael Dorn? Because just the fact that they were there reminded us all the time that there was this great ensemble of actors over the hill at Paramount. And we also had a couple people on the cast who could tell the gang over there, hey, it's a good gig. The scripts are good. Hey, Dorney,
people and I
need to sit. You don't need to sit in makeup for 3.5 hours. And so we and we didn't hold auditions for guest characters, not in those days. And so we just offered the role to Michael, and thankfully he said yes. And then you get these great scenes between Michael Dorn and Keith. And you really feel like they're brothers. Certainly by the end, anyway. And, at the beginning, maybe not when they're fighting each other, but by the end, you really feel
even in Cold Stone's like anger and rage and stuff, you could still see shades of Goliath there. Still, like how he was handling it, the betrayal, how it affected him, and even though it was a lie.
Well, and that was one of the great things about group record, not past tense, it's still true. One of the great things about group recording is that you get a great group of actors in there, and one of the things a great actor does is he, she, or they listen to their fellow actors. So, Keith and Dorney are in the booth, and they're listening to each other. And so they're playing off each other, and you get this great rapport going. It's one of the things, since the pandemic, we're constantly just recording each actor in a vacuum, and we do the best we can. And I like to think we manage it in such a way that the audience isn't really noticing. But, it's inevitable that you lose a little something by not having these actors in the room together. And that was the great thing, back in those days, we would have everybody in the room together. And, Charles Hallahan, Tom Wilson, who's about the funniest guy in the booth you could ever ask for, Asner, and we just had this great group of people for this episode, and all together. And
who played Macbeth? What was the actor who played Macbeth?
John Rhys Davies.
John Rhys Davies. I love him. He was great. One of my favorite lines in the whole series was, "Know her, I named her."
Yeah. Iconic line. Like silly mortals.
And then we flash into the present, and we get the Gargoyle Credo. We got it in the past also, and I like how it seems that all of the gargoyles have practically forgotten its meaning, and then Elisa comes in with the police credo.
Gargoyle can has to protect the castle, like that whole thing, but they've lost their castle. Yeah. So is that so they've disconnected from the idea that they need to protect something, and Elisa comes in with her protect and serve, and that whole exchange between Elisa and Goliath there, because Goliath is it's really kind of quiet and introspective in that whole. He's very soft when he's talking to Elisa there, and it just is so good. The two of them just playing off each other is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's sort of lovely how in tune she is with Goliath's move. She can tell from pretty much moment one that something's troubling him. She may not know exactly what it is, but she absolutely gets that something's troubling him. And it's kind of, to me, that was just sort of lovely, the way they played off each other. I really, watching it again last night, I'd forgotten about that aspect of it, that how in sync the two characters were, and thus, in essence, how in sync Sally and Keith were. And I'd kind of forgotten about that, and it was really lovely, I thought.
Well, it wasn't hard from where I'm looking.
he made it look easy. Not easy to pull off, especially when you're just dealing with voices. But they so much, the animation in this episode's beautiful as well. But so much of that scene is just how they're handling it with the voice acting, and it's just amazing. I love it.
I agree. And just the idea, I love that Hudson's using the old gargoyle credo as an excuse not to go out into the snow. He just wants to stay home and watch television. We've all been there, and but Goliath is really thinking about it.
Well, and then it's brought up, like, we don't need protecting, the clock tower. It's a police station. So that throws it, in that what are they protecting?
Yeah, and one of the goals for the episode as a whole that Michael and Frank and I discussed is, okay, this whole season, the gargoyles have been largely reactive. Vikings attack, they deal with it. They get to the 20th century. Remember the 20th century? Anyway, they get to the 20th century and they deal with it. Commandos attack, the pack attacks, the moment all these people attack them and they deal. But what we wanted to get past was this idea of them simply being reactive characters. And we wanted, as we headed into what we hoped would be season 2, though we didn't at that time have a pickup for season 2. We weren't 100% sure we'd get one. We wanted to set up for season 2 the idea that they were going to start being proactive, that they had to sort of reestablish their raison d'etre, in essence, this idea that they would begin protecting. And we talked a lot about what that would mean to Goliath, and that there was still an element of his medieval mindset that, obviously it wasn't about the castle anymore. They weren't living there, and it certainly wasn't about the clock tower. So what made sense? Is it New York City? And then I thought, I think that's a little advanced, a little too modern an idea for Goliath. But what we thought at that stage, which was still pretty early on in the series, was that he could view the island like, okay, it's Fortress Manhattan. In other words, it's no longer the castle with the walls around the castle, but the island. I get that Goliath could get his head around, right? It's surrounded by water. There are bridges, but we're going to protect this island of Manhattan. And Manhattan is Castle Manhattan. It is the basic idea that he could comprehend, get his head around that idea of protecting the castle, if the castle was this island. So it's not the 5 boroughs, for example. It's just that one island, which, includes the Bronx and Manhattan, but doesn't include Staten Island, Queens, and Brooklyn.
Well, maybe parts of it.
Because and that seemed to work for him. And then, you wind up with this sort of lovely, it's funny, but this lovely kind of scene at the end where, that robber who robbed the grocery store at the beginning of the episode comes in. It's like, I want to turn myself in. And Mr. Jaffe, the guy who owns the store, played by Charles Hallahan, is so stunned. He goes, why? He's not even happy about it. He's just confused. Tom Wilson, as the robber, just says, because 6 monsters just told me to. Like, this guy's so scared out of it. Because, he's turning in the gun. He's turning in the money. He wants to get arrested because that's how he's safe. And then you get this lovely little scene with Elisa on the rooftop across the way. And by this time, the gargoyles are stoned. But, hey, she's saying that the city feels safer already. And what we get now is these aren't just, 6 gargoyles out to protect themselves. It's not just about survival. That's not enough. They're stepping up, and they're going to be heroes now for the city. And so that was something that we very consciously wanted to do. Not just, we felt it would be good to wrap up the season that way. In other words, that would put a nice bow. Awakening to Reawakening. We're back to being what we were at the beginning of this series in the 10th century, which is protectors. We're going to be that for the 20th century in New York, in Manhattan. So it felt like a nice bookend for the season, but it also set us up going into season 2 for them not just to be reactive characters, but to be proactive heroes in season 2.
Mm.
Well, let's talk about our villains a little bit.
Yes, please.
Because we've got our little Frankenstein moment as Demona and Xanatos are working together again. And we get the whole "it's alive" line, which is hilarious. But they've put their heads together to come up with this one more thing to thwart our heroes. And one of my favorite parts is when Demona introduces Xanatos as her servant. It like tickles me because I think she's very serious about that. I think she's just seeing him as like someone who works for her to get her stuff done.
Yeah, it's a fun moment. I think that she, views him. I think there's a little bit of, hey, I'm going to present a point of view that humans are problematic, but I'm working with this human, so for consistency's sake, I'm going to tell Cold Stone that this is my servant. But I also think it's a window into her mindset. I'm using this guy. He doesn't know it, but I know it. And you see Xanatos' kind of annoyed look, but he also doesn't contradict her because he's smart enough to realize that, okay, I'll play along with this. I don't love it, but what the hell?
Well, through the episode, he really lets her kind of take the lead, but I don't think he ever intends for her to take the lead. Like at the end, he turns it around, and he was never really, going along with what she was dishing out. He was just seeing how it played out.
From his point of view, she kept taking it to an extreme that he kept making it clear he didn't want to go to. Again, because we always wanted to present Xanatos as this guy who wasn't wasteful. For whom, he's not into vengeance. He sees the gargoyles as useful because he's capable, or at least, of manipulating them, at least 9 times out of 10. And so why would he want them dead? It was only one episode ago that he tried to get them to come with him to Xanadu. It's like, hey, let me be your patron, let me come live at my estate and I'll keep you, happy. And because, you never know.
Never know when they might be useful again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so he has to, in essence, thwart her more bloodthirsty ambitions. But this isn't, the big break between the two of them, between Xanatos and Demona. That comes in season 2. But it's clearly you begin to see some of the cracks forming in their alliance. But, this is actually a moment of tremendous cooperation for the most part. Agreeing to use his science and her sorcery together to raise Cold Stone in the first place. But you also begin to see the cracks starting to form that's going to split them apart down the road in season 2.
I like that moment where she says that Cold Stone, the Steel Clan robot, and Xanatos and the Armor are her new clan, even though, okay, one of these people is a human, but...
she's
yeah, we just wanted to set up that visual of this sort of, and Keith has this great line, clan, you don't know the meaning of the word, and, it's just, because then you look at her clan, it's Cold Stone, Demona, a Steel Clan robot and, from Goliath's point of view, another Steel Clan robot that is painted red. It's only in this episode. The audience knows that that's Xanatos wearing armor. But Goliath, Brooklyn, Lexington, Broadway, etc., they've been under the assumption that this red robot, this, is just another one of the robots, just slightly, like an upgrade, version 2.0 of the robot. They don't realize it's Xanatos until partway through the episode when the suit starts to short circuit and Xanatos has to pull the helmet off and reveal the inside. Mm-hmm. And that's news to them. The audience already knew, but the Gargoyles didn't realize it until this episode.
Such great stuff. If you were to imagine a reboot, where would you take it off from? Would you go back a little retro or take it from the future?
Well, if someone at Disney actually said to me, what do you want to do? As opposed to telling me what to do. Or ignoring me completely and going with somebody else, which is always possible. My response would be I would pick up, in essence, more or less where the second season left off. I mean, I'd leave space for the SLG comics that I wrote to go in there. You reintroduce the concept for a new audience who hadn't seen it, but this is an age of streaming. So, if we were on Disney Plus with a quote-unquote new season, I would say, hey, put the first 2 seasons up, which they have up now. They can even put up Goliath Chronicles, even though I like to not count that as much. But, and just, if the audience wants to see what happened before, they're up there. They can watch it. And then, we would start right there. And in essence, not that I would spend a lot of time flagging this, but it would be a period piece. I'd set it in 1997, and pick up there. And I mean, why not? And just continue the story. I mean, God knows I've got, and I'm not exaggerating, I've got notes for a couple hundred more stories. Wow. And the odds are every time, and this was so true about Gargoyles, every time we'd write a story, it would give us an idea for 3 more. So I don't perceive it ever ending, given my druthers. And I know some people are like, well, I want a definitive ending. And I'm like, yeah, that's not life. Yeah. Life doesn't have definitive endings, Right. And particularly in a show like Gargoyles, which is an ensemble show, unless we, which, by the way, I would never do, unless we killed off every single gargoyle, why would it end? And so I would just keep doing that. We also had a bunch of spin-off ideas, including, Gargoyles 2198, which was set in the future. We had Gargoyles Dark Ages, which was a prequel set before the pilot in the 10th century.
How about that? Wow, yeah.
We had Gargoyles Bad Guys featuring some of the villains of the series in a sort of Dirty Dozen kind of scenario. We had Gargoyles Time Dancer, which was Brooklyn with the Phoenix Gate, sort of lost in time, bouncing around all these different time travel episodes. And we had New Olympians spinoff, and we had a notion about Sheena Easton's character, who I'm just blanking out.
Heroes of Ulster?
Heroes of Ulster, yeah. Banshee and Cucullin. traveling, seeking redemption. And so we had just all these ideas. Oh, Pendragon. We had a series with gargoyles set during Arthurian times, how the gargoyles interacted with King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. We had all this stuff. And, there was a point when, I may have talked about this before, but when I was in a meeting with Michael Eisner, and it's ironic now because, of course, Disney owns Marvel, but at the time, this is 1994 or 5 or something like that, Michael wanted to buy Marvel. I was in the room when all these executives talked him out of it. And at the time, Marvel was in desperate strait. They were still the number one comic book company in the world, and yet financially they were in desperate strait. And Disney could have picked up Marvel for a song. And they all talked him out of it. They said, look, you want to buy Marvel because you want to make a Spider-Man movie, but the rights to Spider-Man are already owned by Sony, and they double sold them to all these different companies. And Fantastic Four is, there's a conflict between Canon Films and Fox about who has the rights to Fantastic. It's just a mess. You don't want Marvel, trust me. And Michael was like, okay. But, Warner Brothers has DC Comics. We need, the thing that Disney's missing is a superhero universe, an action universe for us to exploit. And he literally turned to me and he said, could Gargoyles be the impetus for that? Starting with Gargoyles, could we create, a whole sort of continuity, consistent universe to build off of? And I said yes. And so we very consciously created backdoor pilots with Pendragon and with and New Olympians and Time Dancer and all these things. But then while we were in the midst of creating these things to create this Gargoyles universe, Frank Wells died. Michael and Jeffrey began feuding. Jeffrey leaves to found DreamWorks, taking both Gary Kreisel and Bruce Cranston, my immediate bosses, with. Rich Frank leaves. All these people who had been huge Gargoyle supporters go away. And then Eisner begins feuding with Roy Disney Jr., and one of the results of that was that one of the complaints about Eisner, which was that he was a micromanager. In essence, Eisner behaved at Disney like one of the old-style Hollywood moguls, and we didn't appreciate it at the time. But what we learned later is that when Eisner stepped back because of all those complaints and his conflicts with Roy Disney, he used to choose the animated series personally. Which ones were we going to make? Michael decided. And back in those days when Michael said, we're making this show, everyone got on board or got out of the way because Michael had said, we're doing this. But when Michael stepped back, he didn't give that power to somebody else. It became a decision made by committee. And once that became a committee decision, you needed, you got somewhere between 8 and 15 people at the table, and you needed it to be virtually unanimous before you could get anything to go. Yeah. And that was so difficult. And with all the Gargoyles, all the people who had, greenlit Gargoyles and had been supporters of it having either gone away or stepped back, we lost all support for that. We got furthest along with the Bad Guys spinoff. but even that eventually fell by the wayside. And so what was going to be this whole Gargoyles action universe that would have eventually created comic books and I'm not kidding, live action movies, just evaporated. But there was a brief period of time when Michael Eisner wanted us to be the Marvel Cinematic Universe for Disney, you know? And then, of course, years later, Iger buys Marvel, and of course, at that stage, he's got to pay a fortune for it because by that time, Marvel had created the Marvel Cinematic Universe and had been wildly successful with it. And so Disney had to pay a fortune for it, whereas Michael Eisner, if he'd done it back in his day, could have gotten it for nearly nothing. But those are the ironies of...
Yeah. I have another job, ladies and gentlemen, so I have to jump off.
All right.
Okay. Is there anything that you're working on that you want to promote?
I'm working on a show about Joe Williams and Douglas the Prophet.
Fantastic.
Hello.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's
Thank
been
you.
amazing to hear your voice again.
I had a great time. Thank you. It was wonderful to just hang out in this world for a long time. And
we would love to have you on again.
That somehow somebody picks that idea up again.
We all hope so. And Keith, we would love to have you on again sometime to discuss one of the Theolog episodes down the line. So hopefully we'll all connect again.
Yeah, do that. I mean, let's do it.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
All right. Great. There are times when I watch the episode, Greg, and I wonder why isn't the secret out, at least among the cops, because Goliath seemed to be in pretty public view of them, but this time I noticed that overturned bus, which kind of disappears halfway through the scene. That may have been an animation error, but Annalise is calling out his name next to Matt, and
yeah, I watched it. I know the bus was there on purpose to sort of hide Goliath, and when Elisa was near him, her from view. But I also noticed that there's a point where Elisa's standing right next to Matt and yells out Goliath, which of course has no meaning to Matt, but why is she yelling out the name of a biblical character at that moment? You know, you feel like he'd have to question it in hindsight. But I kind of think we must have skated by that back in the day. I mean, one of the things that we decided, again, Frank and Michael and I, early on, was that the gargoyles weren't going to jump through hoops to hide, you know, and that people would see them, and they'd tell people that they'd see them, but who would believe them?
They became urban legend.
Cops, obviously, yeah, they'd be an urban legend. And the cops, particularly, we used the episode The Edge to help create some level of also potential logical explanations for the spotting gargoyle. Robots. Oh, it's robots. You know, those creatures that we thought were creatures flying around, turns out they were robots. You know, that's what happened in The Edge. Yeah. So we kind of figured that even in this episode, you know, they saw the creature, meaning cold stone, and bullets are bouncing off, and you're hearing metallic sound, and it's firing off a laser. It's like, another one of those damn robots, you know. And if you caught sight of Goliath, you know, within the water from the hydrant, or, in silhouette from the spotlights or whatever, you know, he's the basic shape of those robots because, ironically, the robots were based on him. And so it all lends credence to the robot theory. Again, if someone believes, I don't think that lavender one was a robot, it's like, you just keep thinking that, friend. You know, it just becomes this thing where
a sea of robots.
Yeah, you know, you we weren't going to go out of our way for them to hide. That's not the gargoyles' MO. On the other hand, it's not their MO to hold a press conference either. So, they're not announcing themselves to the world, but they're not particularly hiding either. So it's something in between that. So when she says, hey, we don't want to be on the news, Goliath's like, yeah, I probably don't. Let's move this someplace else. But on the other hand, he's not going to hide as opposed to do his duty. I'm not going to let someone die just so that I can stay in hiding. I'm not going to let people get hurt just so that no one catches me on camera or something like that. Being a protector comes first. Staying in the shadows is a secondary motivation.
Indeed. And I'm also thinking about something you said about Demona in Long Way Morning and Temptation, how she was not she didn't set out to kill any other gargoyles. She generally wanted to turn Brooklyn and Hudson. It wasn't until she lost her temper. But here she doesn't even seem to lose her temper. She relishes the idea of killing the trio after Goliath and Coldstone go back into the water. I mean, was that to show how far gone she was at this point in contrast to Goliath's reawakening optimism?
Yeah, I think so. We've got, Demona is not a bastion of consistency.
You sure?
I think that with the idea being that Demona tends to be her own worst enemy, she has moments where she's thinking quite logically, usually at the start, before things get heated, and then moments when she just kind of loses it, and gets vengeful or gets angry and gets hot and does stuff that, at a different moment she would go, no, that's too far. And the thing that I kind of love about that in a strange way is that she wouldn't view that as inconsistent. Because she's not that honest with herself, if that makes sense. There's an element of Demona that depends on her fooling herself.
We see a lot of that when we get to City of Stone. Like,
right,
she's done it to protect her own mind against everything that's gone wrong that she's done to herself.
Exactly. In other words, there's a limit to what she can admit to herself, because if she starts being tremendously honest with herself, I think her fear, at least subconsciously, if not flat out consciously, is that she'll start to fall apart, that she'll break, that she's got to have an element of self-deception, of being a little bit delusional. And I don't mean, hallucinatory or anything like that, but just not willing to admit to certain things in certain moments, or else she'll break. And the one thing she's determined not to do over and above everything else is break. It's this idea of surviving. And that's something you get a really sort of wonderful contrast here. Coldstone even asks, is that all there is, mere survival? And she's like, what else do you need? Or something like that. And it's Goliath who says, no, that's not enough. We gargoyles protect. If we're not doing that, we're corrupt. We've lost our way. Survival
that's
is not
Goliath reminding himself too in this whole thing. Like this is all a reminder of what his purpose is.
I think that very much so. I mean, I think that In essence, the beginning of the episode, something is troubling Goliath, and I'm not even sure he knows exactly what it is at the beginning. Living in this clock tower, it's as decent a setup as they can get. And it's not really even about having lost the castle to Xanathars. Because he's feeling like, well, what was in the castle to protect? Certainly not David, right? Not trying to protect Owen. What was it? It's not the building. It's not about the building. So what is, he's already learned the lesson. No, this is about family. It's about Brooklyn, Lexington, Broadway, Hudson, Bronx. That's the family. That's what's important. But who are we in the 20th century? And I don't think he quite has his head around it. But by the end of the episode, it's when he first sees Coldstone and Elise asks, what is this thing? And he's like, an abomination. And that's his gut reaction to seeing the cybernetic zombie that Othello has become, But it doesn't take long for him to realize, no, this is my brother. And why are we here? What are we doing in the 20th century? Is it just survival? No, it can't just be survival. That's not enough. And so you get this great poignant speech from Goliath that's theoretically addressed to Coldstone, but in point of fact is a self-affirmation of what he needs to be and what they need to be. So it's addressed not just to Coldstone, but to Brooklyn, to Lexington, to Broadway, to Hudson, to Bronx, to Elisa, and even to Damona. Though, of course, she can't hear it.
She won't hear it.
She can't allow herself
to
hear it. Because that puts the lie to so many of the choices she's made, going back 1,000 fucking years. So
1,000 years of bad choices.
Right. But that's, and having Keith read that, again, it's so gorgeous. Keith's performance is both affirming and yet heartbreaking. And it's just this sort of wonderful moment, and then it clearly works because Damona doesn't listen, fires off her gun. Coldstone jumps into the path. One of the things that I always thought was awkward about the episode, and I still think kind of awkward, is that, they fall into the river, right? Icy river. Goliath comes very close to drowning, but is rescued by Coldstone. And then they both go into the river again. This time Goliath's fine. And I guess the difference is between, being slammed into the river when he's not ready for it and diving in to try to save somebody else. But I always remember thinking...
He was also much higher up the first time.
Was he? Yeah. I just felt a little bit like... I remember thinking then, and still kind of feeling that way, that like, is there a way we could not go into the river twice, that we could just do it once? And Michael and I talking about it and just not being able to crack it, that we needed both times. And I always felt like it's just awkward. But, life is imperfect.
Nope. And I will say, it's a personal note, as a New Yorker, I'm thinking about the traffic jam that is being caused by the upper level of the George Washington Bridge being closed. On a good day, it can take 2 hours to get past that bridge on Riverside.
And there's not a single car in sight.
Well, imagine they're on the lower level, and the Lincoln Tunnel's probably also a traffic nightmare.
I think we kind of mentally made the decision that it was closed for construction or something like that. Obviously, it's not closed because the gargoyles are having a fight there, or else there'd be, cars there already. So I think we thought that it was closed for maintenance or something, and that's why they picked it.
Smart.
And I love that Goliath flatters Xanatos into taking the fight over there. He refers to Manhattan as your city, which I'm sure he doesn't think even for a moment.
Right. He's smart enough to know he's begun to learn what works on Xanatos, what works on Nimona. There's a little lessons have been learned by Goliath over the course of the season.
Yeah, Xanatos is reasonable.
Up to a point,
But we discussed it a bit, and I just love how this is Goliath becoming a hero again. We discussed that a little bit earlier on, regaining a sense of purpose, redefining what the castle means. I'm glad we were able to discuss that while Keith was still here, but I always thought it was an interesting choice because most other shows that have had Goliath make that vow to protect the city at the end of the pilot.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't ready for that then. None of us thought that. There's a moment at the end of the pilot where it's like, and again, it's Elisa who voices this. This is promising, but here it's at the end of season 1 that she sort of turns around and goes, okay, now we're in business, City's feeling safer already. He's joined the good fight, so to speak. It's not just about getting by. It's about doing what's right. And that's a big change, but it's something that, makes her smile, and I think hopefully makes the audience smile, and then really set us up well, I think, for season 2, and changed the tone of the series, not significantly, but I think in a real way going into the next season. Yeah. They're still reactive sometimes, sometimes something happens and they react to it, but it's not just that anymore. Just as often, I think, in season 2 and in the SLG comics, you see them stepping out to be heroes, stepping out to do the right thing, as opposed to waiting for something bad to come to them. And that's a shift. That's a significant shift off of where we were for the bulk of season 1.
Yeah.
Not the bulk, all of season.
Yeah. Let's also discuss your philosophy on ending seasons, because I've noticed in recent years, especially among the Young Justice fans, that there are people who seem to want that big apocalyptic blowout, that definitive end. I mean, I see, for example, I'm only citing this because I see it quite a bit because it's a show that's currently being made and streaming, but everyone seems to have thought, say, that season 3 or season 4 is going to be that big confrontation with the light and apocalypse, and you're getting the next story in sequence, you're getting open endings instead.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, obviously a lesson that I learned in doing Gargoyles, is that what we wanted at the end of the season was open-ended closure. We were, Reawakenings is a bookend to Awakening. And very consciously, right? But it's not over. If we had only gotten one season, which was definitely possible when Michael and Bryn were completing Reawakening, it would have been a nice little novel, 13-chapter novel, right? And there's some closure there. And if we had never gotten another season, okay. Feel proud of the 13 episodes we did. Wish we had gotten more. Oh, well. But I would have been happy enough, with the work that we did. But we leave it open to do more. And we did the same thing at the end of season 2. Obviously, I can't speak for season 3. That's for someone else to talk about, since I didn't work on Goliath Chronicles in any significant way after the first episode. And even that was taken out of my hand. But when I'm doing the SLG comics, which I think most of the fandom regards as the true third season of the show, both on Bad Guys and on Gargoyles, open-ended closure. And that's been true for any show that I've been the showrunner on, whether it's season 2 of Witch, season 1 of Star Wars Rebels, both seasons of Spectacular Spider-Man, and all 4 seasons of Young Justice. The idea is that we are going to give you closure on the season, but we're not going to give you a conclusion to the series, because we could keep going. We may not get to. Like, for example, at the end of season 2 of Young Justice, we didn't get to keep going until 5 years later when we did. But no one knew that was coming. In fact, by the time we finished writing, we were finishing the writing on season 2. My boss, immediate boss, Jay Bastian, contacted Brandon Vietti and I and said, "You guys know there's not going to be a season 3. Is this really how you want to end season 2? And so even though we knew there was not going to be a season 3, we were like, yeah, this is it. Life goes on. Business as usual. We had concluded the plot lines of that season, but we weren't pretending that it was all over somehow. So open-ended closure. And then lo and behold, 5 years later, I get a call from Sam Register saying, hey, we're coming back. Who knew? We didn't. Glad that we did, don't get me wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
But not like we knew that was coming. We absolutely did not. That's the way it goes. Now, I'm not saying that everything I would ever do, I could definitely see some projects having a beginning, middle, and end to them. But a lot of the shows, that I've done, what would the end be? As we were saying with Keith earlier, what would be the end point of Gargoyles? I guess if I killed off every single gargoyle, which of course I would never do. The only other end is that if we actually did 1,000 years of stories and we finally caught up to Gargoyles 2198, I guess I'd end Gargoyles, because then that would be over and we'd be at Gargoyles 2198. But short of that, why would we ever create an end to it? Life goes on. Same's true about Young Justice, which is a ensemble show about young heroes. So why would it ever end? Our original cast might age out, but we're constantly introducing new, younger heroes. And I'm still interested in the original cast, even though now they're not 14 to 16 years old, they're in their mid-20s. I'm still interested in knowing what's going on with them. We're playing this thing in real time, so why wouldn't I still be interested in them when they were 50 or 58, like me? I still am interesting to myself, I guess. So why wouldn't I?
I mean, there's a reason we keep you around.
Well, mostly because I ramble louder and longer than most other people, but I wouldn't stop it for that reason. Now, if you had a show like Spectacular Spider-Man, that's not an ensemble show. We have an ensemble cast, but it's about Peter. It's about Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. So I could see ending that if we killed off Peter, which, by the way, I also don't have plans to do. But at least there I could see, all right, that's what that show was about, that guy. We have this huge cast rotating around him, rotating around Peter's life, around Spidey's life, etc. But I suppose if we killed off Peter, it would be over. And even if we say, you know, brought in Miles as the new Spider-Man, that would be a different show. You know, I'm not saying they couldn't be in the same continuity. They could. But one show would segue into the next show. In essence, that would be a spin-off show and a new show. Because our show was about the education of Peter Parker. But as long as Peter's alive, I don't see the need to stop it. Because, hell, he was still in his junior year of high school when the show ended. So, and he'd still be getting educated through 4 years of college, through graduate school. And to be perfectly honest, education doesn't stop when you leave school. And so we just keep educating the poor bastard, often painfully, until he was dead. And again, I had no plans to kill him off. So I could see how that one would end at least. But we had no plans to do that. And that's not, and again, otherwise, that's not how life works. And I get a lot of people, especially on Twitter, saying how bad a storyteller I am because I refuse that good stories have endings. And I'm like, yes, good stories have endings, but life doesn't have an ending. You know, not life when it's about the world. You know, I mean, I guess I could blow up the entire Earth-16 and then Young Justice would kind of come to an end. But I'm not going to do that. And there's no ending to, life goes on. If over time, even, and again, not my plan, but if over time we killed off all of the original cast, it still wouldn't mean that it was over. It would just mean that we would be focusing on a different cast of characters. And to me, that's the metaphor for life that we're telling in that show. And the same would be true of Gargoyles, but not necessarily of Spider-Man, because that was about one guy. It also told the story, incidentally, of all these other people in his life, but it was really about one guy. So it's a different beast. And yet the end result is more or less the same, open-ended closure at the end of every season. We do bring some closure to all the plot lines of that season. We're never pretending that it's over, that there aren't still loose ends, that there aren't still stories to tell. And that's why when people say you end on a cliffhanger, and as you guys know, that just drives me crazy, because it just makes me want to say to them, I don't think you understand what the word cliffhanger means.
Whenever people do that,
cliffhanger is...
Yeah, whenever people do that, you just send them a YouTube clip of Riker saying Mr. Worf fire when Picard is a Borg.
That was definitely a cliffhanger. Oh, my God. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you leave the definition of a cliffhanger originates with the idea that your hero or heroine or whoever is hanging off a cliff and is at risk of dying, and you end and you don't know whether or not that person survived. That's a cliffhanger. It doesn't literally have to be a cliff. But in essence, that's a cliffhanger. The fact that I didn't, at the end of season 1 of Young Justice, we say, hey, there were 16 hours where 6 members of the Justice League were missing. What went on during those 16 hours? That's a loose end. That's not a cliffhanger. The fact at the end of season 2, we showed Vandal Savage and Darkseid shaking hands, that's intriguing, but it's not a cliffhanger. One's life is in danger. The fact that, the classic cliffhanger of all time, I suppose, from a television standpoint, and most of your audience won't remember this.
Who shot JR?
Dallas. who shot JR. JR's shot. You don't know if he lives or dies. You don't know who pulled the trigger. That's a cliffhanger.
But if you wrapped it up, they wouldn't be happy with that either. If you wrapped it up in a nice little bow.
That's the other thing. One of the things about any fandom, is that there are always going to be some fans who are like, why aren't you doing what I want? But the problem is that you could grab any dozen fans who have that attitude, and if you ask that dozen, okay, what is it you want? They wouldn't all agree. Some of them are like, you're not giving me enough Dick Grayson. Some of them are like, you're not giving me enough Tim Drake. Some of them are like, you're not giving me enough Jason Todd. 3 Robins. Hell, some will be like, you're not giving me enough Damian Al Ghul. 4 Robins. And I'm like, I can't possibly satisfy all 4 of you. So you know what? I'm going to ignore all 4 of you.
Just do what you want to do.
And I know I've said this before, if I'm not passionate about the work, I've got to trust my own instincts because I have to be passionate about the work. Brandon Vietti and I have to be passionate about Young Justice. Vic Cook and I have to be passionate about Spectacular Spider-Man. Frank Parr and I have to be passionate about Gargoyles, because if we're not passionate about the work, then there's no passion coming through for the audience to feel. If we're just hacking it out or doing what we think, we think this is what the fans want, So let's just do that because that'll make them happy. Then it'll be crap, and no one will be happy.
I'm coming one of the other fandoms I'm in. Literally, just everyone was dead at the end of it. End of show. Done, and they hated it. All the fans hated it. I don't know anyone who liked that ending, but if you leaving it open, left it open for more stories, but instead they just massacred everyone. And
it's a solution. It's not a solution I would ever use,
right,
but it's a solution. If you really want to end it, you want to make sure it's never going to effing come back. I guess that's the way to go. But I'd rather leave it. Look, season 4 is, I'll say this now. I guess you could call this a spoiler, but it's not exactly shocking. Season 4 of Young Justice, which will end in June.
This is going up June 24th.
All right, so it's over by now. And it will have ended with open-ended closure. Spoiler. And we have no idea if we're back for a season 5. They may pick us up by the end of the season because we're recording this in April. They may pick us up by the end of the season. They may pick us up 5 years from now like they did after season 2. I have no idea. Or they may never pick us up. But either way, I'm fine with it ending where it ends. And I will say right now, spoiler, it's going to end with open-ended closure. We will wrap up the plot lines of the season, but we will not wrap up the series. And there will be loose ends, and there will be intriguing moments, if we've done our job right, that will make people, I hope, want a season 5, which they may or may not get. And I'm okay with that. Obviously, I'd prefer to do the season 5 than to not do it. But that's not up to me. So all I can do is do what I think is right for the show. And if that means we're done, at least we went out the way we wanted to go out.
All right.
I like it. I like it.
I like that too. And me, I still want a proper 3rd season of Gargoyles. I want a proper 3rd season of Spectacular Spider-Man, even though that one is definitely never, ever going to happen. I want a season 5 of Young Justice, and but I'm also happy with what we got, and I'm happy that we'll be back soon on this show to discuss a long season with a lot of great stories. But before we wrap things up, Greg, this is going up on June 24th. Is there anything you would like to promote?
Sure. By June 24th, all of season 4 of Young Justice will be out on HBO Max, and I hope everyone will have watched that. I hope, in fact, that people watch all 4 seasons of Young Justice, which will be up on HBO Max, and keep binging them so that we have a shot at a season 5. Also, starting in June and into July, we are doing a canon companion comic called Young Justice Targets with DC Comics, written by me, penciled and inked by Christopher Jones, and colored by Jason Wright. Christopher and Jason did those great YJ posters for season 4 that you may have seen on Twitter and other places. Different poster for each arc of the season. And so it's a great art team. And I've finished writing all the scripts for Targets, and I'm really proud of that story. It's a 6-issue miniseries. And those are the things that I can talk about. I mean, obviously, it'd also be great if people kept binging Gargoyles on Disney Plus, because the best chance we have at something happening with Gargoyles comes out of people, Disney seeing on Disney Plus that Gargoyles is popular.
And I also want to make the point again to people, X-Men 97 is coming out. It's a continuation of the 90s X-Men cartoon. They brought back the original showrunners and as many of the voice actors as they could. It's a period piece set in 1997. They're getting what we want. It's Disney. It's possible.
Don't give up hope.
And with that, Jen, do you have anything else you would like to promote?
Nope, I'm good right now.
Well, hopefully we'll have some stuff up soon to sell. And I want to thank all of our listeners for making it through the first season with us. It was a pleasure. I think we are going to be going into season 2. We have a lot of great plans for the podcast. And see you soon. Like the series itself, we're just getting started.
I've always wanted to say that.